Everything seemed to be fixed on blueberry as the only option. She did not speak but glanced at the time. "Can you finish it in 10 minutes? The man smeared the blueberry jam on the bread. In fact, the bread had been in the fridge for a whole day. It was not baked or heated. Even if it was not hard, it was definitely very cold and uncomfortable to eat. The man, on the other hand, took a few bites and ate the 2 pieces of bread with a bit of jam. Then he continued to smear on the bread. In less than 3 to 4 minutes, he had finished the remaining pieces of bread. After eating, the man slowly closed the lid of the jam and put it aside. He then looked at her. A very sumptuous meal. Not bad. Feng Ling. She was about to ask if there was something wrong with this man's brain when he had already stood up, picked up his coat and said indifferently, "Sorry for disturbing." Then he left. The door opened and closed and the surroundings returned to silence. Finally she was alone again. Feng Ling silently looked at the jam on the coffee table and did not move for a long time. Feng Ling was sick. All the students were surprised to learn that Coach Ling, who had never taken a leave since working in the martial arts club, was sick and even took 2 days off. They wondered if something had happened. And the real reason was that after Li Nanheng left that night, Feng Ling always felt that the room was filled with that man's smell. The kitchen, the bathroom, the sofa, the living room, she seemed to be able to feel the traces of that man's existence wherever she went, even though he did not leave anything behind. So, on that cold night, she opened all the windows in the room, trying to release the man's unique smell and the faint scent of tobacco. However, because the windows were open for too long and it was too cold outside, the edge of the bedroom window was frozen and could not be closed tightly, so the wind leaked out at night. Feng Ling's bed was facing that window, and unfortunately she caught a cold from the cold wind that leaked in that night. The next morning she could not even get out of bed. The world was spinning around her. She reluctantly took out her mobile phone to call the manager and the boss to ask for a day off. Then she slept the whole day and did not wake up until the next morning. When she woke up, she did not feel like eating. She boiled some water, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat on the sofa with a cup of hot water in her hands. She drank it in small sips and barely made it through the second day of her leave. She only asked for 1 day off, but the next day she was still sick and couldn't make it. The paper basket was full of paper towels to wipe her nose. She coughed one after another. She had never been so sick because of a cold since she was a child. She slept on the sofa for another day. Chapter 1021. Feng Ling pulled out the chair next to her and sat on a slightly more comfortable chair. "Boss, head coach, please send the irrelevant people out. Why are the others still in a daze? Continue practicing." Before he could finish his words, Zhang Xian grabbed his wrist. That person strode in from outside the door and grabbed her tightly, not backing down at all. "Coach Ling, I have something to tell you." He didn't call her by her name again. Instead, he gave her respect and called her by her current title. He was so strong that she couldn't even pull her hand back. "Can't you see that I'm in class? Mr. Li, are you always like this? Your matters are always the most important. You have to get what you want and you have to get the feelings you want. If you want others to wait for you for 3 years, they have to wait for you. No matter how unwilling or wrong they are, they have to listen to your wishes first. Others have to surround you for everything. You're the young master of the Li family, and I'm an orphan with no parents and no one to rely on, so I have to be bullied by you inside and out. After I get out of the place that belongs to you, do I have to continue to be tortured by you?" Li Nanheng paused and let go. When her black and white eyes were fixed on his, he saw the coldness and wariness in her eyes, as well as the red blood vessels that appeared due to the cold and fever that had yet to subside. Other than the time when he had forced her to point her gun at him because he had kissed her forcefully and bullied her, she had never looked at him like this before. But it was this look that made Li Nanheng's heart, which had been in pain for 2 years, feel as if even the last drop of blood was about to be drained. The man wanted to say something, but he looked at her, who had been sitting on the chair coldly, and finally said, "I'll wait for you outside." He turned around and walked out directly under the puzzled gazes of the martial arts club owner and the head coach. He even closed the door of the classroom. Under Feng Ling's cold instructions, the students who thought they were watching some love and hate drama hurriedly continued to practice, lest they provoked the cold-faced female coach who seemed to be in a bad mood. However, they could not help but occasionally look in Feng Ling's direction. "So her name is Feng Ling. Which 0 is still the number 0? Or which 0 is a bell or a dewy sense of inspiration? It doesn't seem to match her style." Under the curious gazes of a group of people, the cup in Feng Ling's hand suddenly spilled on the ground. The full cup of water fell by her feet and splashed the edge of her trousers, but clearly she did not notice it herself. She still sat there expressionlessly, and her eyes were also indifferent. "What are you looking at?" Feng Ling looked at them expressionlessly. A group of male students thought absent-mindedly. The water in the cup seemed to be very hot. She returned to the desk and said before sitting down, "This martial arts club is my area. Please don't come here again, Mr. Li." Li Nanheng stood there without moving. Feng Ling sat behind the desk and looked up at him. "Why aren't you leaving?" Li Nanheng was silent for a moment. He walked in, pulled out a chair in front of the desk and sat down. Seeing that he didn't speak but just sat there, Feng Ling looked at him in confusion. "I'm watching you take the medicine." The man glanced at the glass of water in front of her. Feng Ling was silent for a moment, opened the medicine box impatiently, took out 2 pills, and was about to swallow them when the man's voice came again. "Don't you know how to take the medicine before taking it? Just one is enough." Feng Ling paused. She did not look at the man but looked down at the instructions written on the medicine box. As he said, she only took 1 pill at a time. It was not good for the body if the medicine was too much. She pursed her lips, put a pill into her mouth, picked up the water, took 2 sips and put it down. "All right, can I go?" She looked at Li Nanheng. "Read the latest chapter of Love is Not Comparable to Your Claw Book House for free." It seemed that although this little girl usually did not show anything on the surface, in fact, she knew many things very well in her heart. She could even see his frequent contacts with Mo Jingshan and the underground arms business, but she probably didn't know what kind of business he was doing. She only knew that he didn't lack anything. Li Nanheng continued the previous topic. "I'm also desperate now. The elders of the Li family were angered by me. They drove me out of the base and wanted to sever ties with me. Now I'm also a poor person. No one wants me. I just don't know if Coach Ling will take me in." Feng Ling was puzzled. "Hasn't 11 base been handed over to you long ago? Apart from using their status as elders to suppress your arrogance, how could they have the ability to drive you out of 11 base?" Li Nanheng didn't explain but just looked at her. "Don't talk nonsense. We've known each other for so long. You and I don't talk nonsense. Just tell me, do you accept me or not?" Feng Ling's eyes were not shaken at all. "No. You're so busy every day. Don't you need an assistant or something?" "Yes." Feng Ling looked at him calmly. "But what I need is an assistant, not you. I don't seem to meet the requirements." "Why don't I meet the requirements?" "You don't meet any requirements." "For example, which point?" Feng Ling's patience was almost at the limit. Why didn't she find that Li Nanheng was such a troublemaker before? Knowing that it was impossible, he still came to challenge her bottom line? "You don't meet any requirements at all. If I have to point out one point, all the staff of our martial arts club are unmarried. It's enough that you are married. Our boss said that people who are married and have families are not suitable for this kind of work that focuses on martial arts too frequently, because they can't work too hard. If they get hurt or suffer a little, they will be blamed by their families. They are too burdensome. Well, then I should be standing in the range of the standard. I'm not married to anyone." Li Nanheng looked straight at her. Feng Ling frowned and her eyes suddenly became much colder. "Li Nanheng, shameless as you are, it doesn't mean that you can lie to get in here. Even if you don't like Feng Mingzhu, she is still your wife. Don't you think it's shameless for you to ignore her existence and hook up with others? I'll say it for the last time. I didn't marry Feng Mingzhu and I didn't marry anyone. I didn't marry anyone, understand?" Li Nanheng's hand was still on the table in front of her, and he looked straight at her. "Even if I die now, no so-called wife will come out to settle the score. Of course, if you are willing to become my wife and play the role of finding trouble for others for me, I will be very happy." Feng Ling coldly looked at him. "You didn't marry anyone? Are you trying to say that the major mainstream media in Los Angeles 2 years ago are fake?" "Li Nanheng, give me another year." Tiske, speaking of student Chen, what he experienced tonight was simply inhuman torture. He was forced to do balance support training for half an hour, plus other difficult movements, each of which was like picking his bones, but he couldn't refuse and had to listen to Coach Li's instructions. When the class was finally over, he didn't even have the strength to call out Coach Ling's name, let alone think about Coach Ling. He lay on the ground dejectedly, too lazy to move. In the end, he was kicked by Coach Li, who warned him that lying on the ground was too easy and twisted his waist. After intensive training, lying on the ground like this would only distort his tight muscles and joints. He told him to get up and leave immediately, or stand up and lean against the wall. Chen Beiqing's anger and temper were all gone now. He didn't want to say a word. Today was also the first time that she was not invited to dinner after Chen Beiqing's class. Although she refused him every time, he was used to sending flowers before coming and asking if she wanted to have dinner with him before leaving. Even if he was refused, it had become a habit of his. But today the office door that was supposed to be knocked on was pushed open by another man. It was not Chen Beiqing but Li Nanheng, who had changed back to his black casual sportswear. "Boss Feng, come home from work. Shall I send you back?" Li Nanheng stood in front of the door, looking as if he was working hard. He looked like a proper person, and it really seemed like that was the case. The corner of Feng Ling's mouth twitched because he called her Boss Feng. She really didn't want to talk to him, but this man was so determined in her life that she really couldn't imagine what he wanted to do next. "If you want to go back by yourself. I'll take a taxi back." Feng Ling lowered her head to sort out the lesson plans and videos on her desk, saying, "Also, please move away from my room next door." In just a few days after finding her, this man had occupied almost all of her living space. She was really caught off guard. She didn't know how to deal with it. "You know I live next door. It's convenient for you to drive or take a taxi. Why do you take a taxi?" "I still have things to do." Feng Ling didn't look at him. Li Nanheng took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket and said indifferently, "Go ahead. I'll send you back when you're done." With that, he went out to light a cigarette. Feng Ling sat in the office and the man smoked near the bathroom outside. About 10 minutes later the man came back, but Feng Ling was still sitting behind the desk. He took a chair and sat down without speaking. She didn't speak either. As time passed, everyone else had left, and only the two of them were left in the martial arts club. Seeing that he really didn't leave, Feng Ling looked up at him, but at the moment she raised her eyes, they suddenly met the man's eyes. He had been looking at her. Chapter 1029. She held a pen in her hand, and when her fingers met the man's gaze, she tightened slightly. But only for a moment. She looked away, lowered her head, and continued to work. In the end she couldn't delay any longer. Feng Ling put down the pen in her hand, and when she raised her eyes, she saw that the man was still looking at her. "I'm done." The man's patience had been extended infinitely. He looked at her impatiently. "I'll send you to the hospital. If we pass by the hospital, I'll send you to the hospital first." "There's no need to go to the hospital. In the past, I went to the battlefield where the terrorists were, and I didn't die in the Snake Valley. It's just a cold." Feng Ling got up to pack her things. After she was almost done, she walked around the desk and walked out. "Don't take a cold lightly. In recent years there have been many classic medical cases. All kinds of diseases start from the symptoms of a cold," Li Nanheng said, glancing at the sky outside. "Wear more clothes. Don't catch a cold again." Wasn't it all thanks to him that she had a cold and sweaty feeling before? They hadn't seen each other for 2 years. This man had only appeared for a few days, but he had turned the world that she thought was peaceful upside down. Feng Ling didn't speak. She picked up her bag, brushed past the man, and walked out without looking back. However, she had only taken a few steps when the tall, long-legged man took the bag in her hand. Her hand was empty. She turned her eyes abruptly, only to see that the man took her bag to the side of the car, opened the door and threw the bag in. At the same time, he opened the door and motioned for her to get in. Seeing that she didn't move, Li Nanheng was still patient. "Come here." Feng Ling didn't want to get in his car. But her bag and cell phone were there. She didn't drive here today because she was not feeling well. Now she wanted to take a taxi back, but she didn't have any money. She couldn't go back empty-handed, and her key was also in her bag. She abruptly walked past the man and reached out to pick up the bag thrown on the seat. However, the moment she picked it up and was about to turn away, the man behind her suddenly blocked her in front of the car door. Feng Ling abruptly turned around and almost bumped into his arms. She staggered back a step and his dark gaze lowered his head to look at her indifferently. He placed his hands on both sides of the car door, trapping her between him and the car. Li Nanheng. Feng Ling's heart instantly jumped because of his sudden oppression. She raised her eyes and looked at him coldly. "Get out of the way." Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at the woman who was as cold as ever and did not let go. He raised his hand and gently pinched her chin. His warm fingertips gently rubbed her chin, and he narrowed his eyes coldly. "It was indeed a wise move to allow you to disguise as a man and mingle with me." Chapter 1036. When Feng Ling woke up again, she had already returned to her bed at home. Her head was still a little dizzy, but at least it was only the after-effect of the drug and she did not feel much pain. She sat up on the bed and looked around. Then, she lowered her head and saw that the clothes she was wearing had not changed. It was still the one she was wearing when she was knocked out and kidnapped. At that time, she had just taken a shower and changed into a loose and comfortable set of clothes. This was the one she was wearing. She got out of bed and walked out of the bedroom. Every room was empty and there was no trace of Li Nanheng. If it weren't for the fact that she was still a little dizzy and the smell of the drug still lingered in her nose, she would have thought that what happened before was just a nightmare and nothing had happened. However, it was not a dream. Feng Ling thought for a while, walked out, opened the door and looked at the door next door. She saw that the door was closed and she could not see any movement inside. She stood in front of the door for a long time and then turned to look at the night outside the window. She must have slept not long after being sent back. The sky was still dark and it was now 2:30 in the morning. If it weren't for the fact that Feng Ling was suddenly drugged, she might have been able to deal with this kind of sudden kidnapping, but after all, she was drugged. If it weren't for Li Nanheng's timely arrival, she didn't know where she would be now. But after all, when she was in 11 base, she had encountered situations several times more dangerous than tonight. This kind of small matter was obviously not worth mentioning to Li Nanheng. So it seemed that there was no need for her to thank him. Feng Ling silently took a step back and was about to close the door when her hand paused. In her mind, the deformed car door was suddenly kicked open by the man, and the man rushed into the car to pick her up and turned to leave. Because he had to take care of her, he could only turn around and was hit hard by the rod. Although that kind of steel rod wouldn't be life-threatening as long as he was properly guarded, the rod had hit a very vulnerable and fatal place on the back of his neck. If Li Nanheng hadn't dodged in time, he might have been knocked unconscious by that blow. No matter what, the place that was hit wouldn't be a light injury. Feng Ling's hand paused on the doorknob for a moment. A moment later, she walked out and was about to knock on the door next door when she suddenly heard the door behind her close automatically. Feng Ling, she looked back at the door of her house behind her. She seemed to have forgotten to bring her keys with her. Feng Ling stood alone in the corridor under the automatic sensor lights. After a moment of silence, she walked over and knocked on the door. After knocking a few times, it was still very quiet inside. Then she knocked again. Chapter 1040. Only then did Feng Ling realize what she was doing. She was making breakfast in his kitchen? She even made 2 servings. She abruptly put down the plate in her hand, turned and walked out. Li Nanheng looked at her suddenly changed expression and raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? If you want to eat, eat by yourself. I'm not hungry. It's almost time. I'll call a locksmith over to help me unlock the door. With that, she walked out. Go after breakfast. I'm not eating. Li Nanheng did not speak, but his hand had already clasped her shoulder and pulled her back from the kitchen door. When Feng Ling turned to look at him impatiently because of his movements and strength, the man only said, "There's no hurry to leave after breakfast. I'll call someone over to unlock the door. You don't have to go downstairs to find the security guard." Feng Ling glanced at the phone he placed not far away. When she left the room last night, she did not bring her phone with her. If she went to find the security guard now, she didn't know how efficient they would be. Would they be able to find a reliable locksmith? She glanced at the time. It's time to find someone. Go sit down at the dining table. I'll make the call, Li Nanheng said as he patted her back. Don't worry, go eat breakfast. How can you not eat the breakfast you made yourself? You made so much. How can I finish it alone? I don't remember you being the kind of person who likes to waste food. What? Have you been living too freely in the past 2 years? Have you become so arrogant that you'll waste the breakfast you made? Feng Ling did not understand his words for a moment. When she came back to herself, the man had already pressed her to the dining table. She looked at the breakfast that the man brought up on the table. The breakfast that she had personally cooked. She was silent for a moment, picked up the cutlery, picked up a golden, perfectly fried egg, and put it into the plate in front of her. She took a bite. Li Nanheng picked up his cell phone to make a call and came back less than 3 minutes later. He pulled out the chair opposite the dining table and sat down. As he picked up the tableware, he said indifferently, I've already contacted someone. They'll be here in half an hour. Eat in peace. She didn't expect that she had unknowingly made so much. Although she had finally learned how to cook in the past 2 years, she actually made very little. She really didn't expect that someone like her who hated the kitchen would one day use such a calm and patient attitude to make breakfast, and it was very sumptuous and complicated. What was she thinking? The breakfast was indeed delicious, but no matter how Li Nanheng praised it, Feng Ling sat there pretending not to hear him. She did not raise her head or look at him. A few minutes after breakfast, the locksmith arrived. Hearing that the person had arrived, Feng Ling immediately got up and walked out as if she was liberated. Feng Ling looked at him and didn't speak. Suddenly she felt a tight grip on her arm. She turned around with a jerk, only to see Li Nanheng suddenly came over and pulled her away. At the same time, he turned his back to the window, shielded her in his arms and pushed her out. Go. Feng Ling turned back and was about to speak when she suddenly heard the sound of explosions coming from the 3 windows facing the financial building on the opposite side of the bedroom balcony and kitchen at the same time. This meant that there was more than one sniper on the other side but in all directions. Li Nanheng. Don't talk nonsense. Go first. Li Nanheng pushed her forward without hesitation, his back still blocking all possible directions behind her, and warned her with his eyes to leave immediately. Please remember this book's domain name. For mobile version website, M. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.